No help for Christian refugees, but gays are a priority for the Trudeau Liberals. I'm Brian Lilley with TheRebel.Media. The Trudeau Liberals have said time and time again that when it comes to refugees, they want to do one thing: help the most vulnerable.
Well, we, like the United Nations, target the most vulnerable.
Well, that's a nice phrase, but the fact of the matter, the very simple, obvious to anyone fact of the matter is that most of the vulnerable people coming out of Syria belong to ethnic and religious minority groups. We're talking about the Christians facing genocide, Yazidis, the men killed, the women sold into sexual slavery. And yes, we're even talking about religious minorities such as Alawite Muslims. This is a small sect of Islam hated by groups like ISIS and others. So you just might think that if this country is going into a war region, a war driven by ethnic and religious hatred, and the government has said time and time again that they're targeting the most vulnerable people, looking to bring the most vulnerable to Canada, that maybe you might have some idea of how many of these people from each group we've actually brought in. We had such numbers under the previous Conservative government, but now we're told they don't exist. I asked a bureaucrat during a background briefing how this can be the case. How can you help the most vulnerable if you don't track who's who? The senior bureaucrat at the immigration department said that while I raised an interesting philosophical question, and while we could have a long philosophical discussion about it, the simple fact is, he said, they don't track this information. And he didn't seem like he wanted to. This I find unbelievable. Canada's trying to pull refugees from an area where the most vulnerable are ethnic and religious minorities, an area where many of these minorities don't even go into the refugee camps because, well, they're not safe. And we're told we don't track any of that information. Unreal. So I pressed Immigration Minister John McCallum on this during his news conference. How can he claim that we are helping the most vulnerable people if we don't actually track who is or who is not part of a vulnerable group? His answer is disturbing because it dumps a Canadian responsibility into the lap of the United Nations.
So, what we do is we take the names from the United Nations, and by definition, those are vulnerable people, and we choose who to come to Canada according to vulnerability, irrespective of religion.
Okay, so what am I to take away from this? That we aren't helping the most vulnerable? That we're simply helping whoever shows up first? That the government's lying to us? Well, kind of. While we don't track religious or ethnic minorities, I was told by officials it would be wrong to ask a refugee about their ethnicity or religion. The fact is that Canada is making LGBT refugees, in particular gay men, a priority. That's right. You can't ask how or where someone worships, but you can ask who they like to sleep with. When I asked McCallum about this contradiction, well, he brought it back to vulnerability.
What they do and what we are doing in conjunction with the United Nations is seeking to welcome the most vulnerable. And gay people are more vulnerable because of persecution of gay people in that region.
This is craziness. Christians are being beheaded, they're being crucified, slaughtered. So are other ethnic and religious groups. So why aren't they a priority as well? I'm not saying that gays shouldn't be a priority. I know that when ISIS gets a hold of them, gay men are thrown off of very tall buildings to their death, among other horrible ways to die. But I am saying, why is that more important than being crucified or beheaded? Why is that worth tracking, worth prioritizing? But the Christians, the Yazidis, the Alawites, well, we can't. I mean, we wouldn't want to ask rude questions. I think part of the answer is the liberal worldview. They like to think that they're colorblind, that religion doesn't matter. Forget that they're masters of playing ethnopolitics here in Canada. What does matter is that in that part of the world, in Syria, ethnicity and religion do matter. They define you more than people like John McCallum will admit. He and his officials could track all of this information if they wanted to, but they don't. They don't want anyone thinking that they're helping Christians come out of a Muslim country due to persecution. That might play badly in the pages of the Toronto Star, but helping a gay man, that will never play badly in the Star. The fact is, both groups, and others like them, are being persecuted, tortured, killed for who they are. And that's why they deserve our help and our support. It's too bad that the majority of those that truly need Canada's help and protection are too politically incorrect for Justin Trudeau and his Liberal government to mention by name.